Well, this is Vanessa's.
Mine's working. Okay. Testing, testing.
Mine's on. Hello? Yep.
Hello, can you hear me?
Working?
Yes.
Good, we've got the tech out of the way, which is a good start. So thank you everybody for coming. A quick virtual wave to our guests who are online. Good to see you both. We are court, so I've got a message to read out, which is the usual one that you hear at the beginning of every one of these meetings. If you could make sure your phones, please, are either turned off or on silent. Despite the fact that was mentioned last night at the planning committee, and then halfway through the planning committee, phones went off, but there we are. Just to let you know that there are no fire drills plans during the meeting. So if you hear the alarm, treat it as a real one. The evacuation route is outside here, down the stairs, around the council chamber, and you all know the usual place at the front of the building, or the side really, isn't it, near the inner car park. Don't use the lifts, please, and don't re-enter the building until you're advised it is safe to do so. Good. So we've got quite a big pack here, and thank you everyone who's been involved in the preparation of that. And if I can start off by seeking someone to put forward the minutes, if they're deemed a true and accurate record of what occurred on the last occasion, please. And you were present. Always a good one. Good. So proposed by Councillor Andre. Do I have a seconder of the minutes? Yes, good. Garrett, thank you very much. All those in favour? 2, 3, good. And any against? Any abstentions? Good, we'll pass them. Thank you very much indeed. Whew, that was a close call. I was quite surprised at the meeting last night that people were advised they could vote on the minutes even if they weren't present at the meeting. No, I think that was wrong. Yeah, it was odd advice. Right, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest to raise today? No declarations of interest, good. Public questions. Do we have any public questions, Joe? No public questions, nobody in the gallery. Right, dispensing with that, thank you very much. On to item 4 of the agenda then, please, which is the pension board update. And you'll turn to page, I believe, 13, is it, starting in your pack? Joe.
I was going to suggest that perhaps Martin might like to report back on this as he's chair of the board and available virtually. Martin, are you able to comment?
Good. Can you hear us, Martin?
I can hear you. Yes, hopefully you can hear me. Good.
We can hear you.
Great. So brief overview of the last board meeting. We followed on from the valuation talk given by the actuaries at the previous committee meeting, and we just looked from the admin side, had another look at the valuation process, just checked in with the pension fund manager and the administration manager that the data was flowing over to the actuaries or in a satisfactory way, and it is. So we didn't have any concerns about the actual process of the valuation, and we know that the actuary has stated that the fund data is in a very good place, which is a very reassuring. We went on to look at the big ticket items that are coming up from the government, hopefully in the late summer, autumn, things like the TCFD climate risk reporting, levelling up. Also got pensions dashboard, got McLeod, reforms to the education sector. So a lot of consultations we're expecting in the late summer, autumn, and the question of whether we need to meet up perhaps on an informal basis if those do come through well before the next meeting. We also looked at risk, which will be an ongoing subject for us. We know we need to look at cyber risk, and the pension fund manager spoke about perhaps some training on that. And also the other risk that we looked at was the resourcing of the pension fund management of the pension fund internally. I know there's a review going on that, which we're following closely. So those were a brief overview of the headlines that we were discussing, Chair. Were there any questions?
Thank you, Chair. On page 18, we see highlighted the red-rated risks and the board's concern around the key person risk is identified there. I think this is from my time previously on this committee, that the whole issue of capacity and resilience was an issue, and we indeed had the Director of Finance before us to try to give us some reassurance on that. I'm not reassured by what I read here. So I'd like to ask Mr. Doyle, you're looking for a presentation at your meeting on October 2022 on the structure review. What would you hope to see in that presentation that would give you assurance or reassurance that this risk is being appropriately mitigated?
It is around the single person risk and succession planning. There seems to be a lot resting on Joe's shoulder, the pension fund manager's shoulders, and that is a risk that having a kind of a fallback, and that there will be no risk to the running of the fund if Joe perhaps say decided to leave. I'm sure that would never happen, but that's something that every fund has to think about. The key personnel in a specialist position, how's that knowledge being shared, and how are the duties being shared, and some extra resource, so Joe, the pension fund manager, can get all that she would like done. I think that's a fair summary. I don't know whether Joe had anything to add around that.
Just to kind of thank you all for your support and concern about this. Referring back to what Councillor Garrett mentioned about when the Director of Finance attended the Pension Fund Committee, sorry, one glasses. He at that point agreed that a resource review would be undertaken, and a resource review was undertaken at that point, and I was granted authority to recruit a governance consultant, a governance support personnel. And subsequently to that, my role was changed from being technical finance manager with corporate VAT, treasury management and pension funds to solely pension fund. So I'm now 100% pension fund instead of 80%. Conversely, Joe Cook, pension fund treasury management accountant, has gone from 0.6 allocated to the pension fund to 0.2 to take on some of the bits that I was moving away. and my vacant post is still a vacant post, having tried to recruit and failed to recruit. So in the resource restructure for finance, resource allocation to the pension fund went from 1.4 FTEs to 2.2 FTEs, but one of those FTEs is a vacant post. So we are in the process of commissioning a review of the operational structure with an independent procurement being undertaken to look at, for a fund of our size and with our complexity in terms of members, employers, investment allocation, what resource should we have to run all aspects of the pension fund? Obviously, we've got Matthew and his team running the administration side, but there are a lot of big projects coming up on the administration side, which we need to continue business as usual, as well as deal with the projects. And we've also got the rest of the pension fund in terms of accounting, finance, funding, investment, governance, pension fund committee, pension board, and the new developments in terms of climate change, pooling, levelling up, all of that sort of stuff that's coming through. So we did undertake a procurement of that activity, and we had 4 bids received. But because of the disparity in the pricing of those bids that came through, and a lack of real comparability between the answers that came through and the resourcing structures that they undertook, that were presented to us, we withdrew that procurement because we couldn't get to the decision without effectively asking more questions than we'd asked previously. So we're in the process of redrafting that procurement activity with more specific questions and more targeted pricing questions and evaluation resources. And that review at the moment is with the Assistant Director of Finance for consideration of the revised procurement documentation. It has been with the Assistant Director of Finance for about 3 weeks, and she has promised me that she will try to get it done by the end of this week. So at the moment, we are running on 1.2 FTEs to run everything that isn't administration on the pension fund, and it is a big concern of mine, and a big concern, I think, of all of us. I'm not quite sure what more I can do at the moment to address that, other than keep raising it as a risk, keep talking to my line manager, who is the Assistant Director of Finance, keep trying to get in touch with the Director of Finance to obtain information and support from him.
We all appreciate enormously what you do, Joe and Joe. And I think it's a more generic issue for the council than just in this room. And I think it came out as well at the audit committee as well, which you chair, Andrew, that we are not very well placed as an organisation, either in terms of resilience or succession planning. And we do have an awful lot of individuals in key high dependency roles for which there would seem to be very little support and backup. So I think that's a systemic problem for the council. But you know, our concern here is specifically with this instance. The case was raised well by Mr. Dole. So I think Vanessa was next, and then I'll come on to.
Oh, it does. I want to endorse Councillor Garrett's comments, because I too, reading that, was thinking, oh no, the structure of pensions over the last 5 years has changed dramatically. We now have the addition of a pensions board, which creates obviously more work, more meetings. Because of pooling, the government have got more and more involved. The legislation coming down and through to us is twice as much as it used to be that I knew 10 years ago. I sometimes go off island to pension meetings with fund managers. Now, really, Jo should be going as well, but she doesn't have the time. And it really is just too much. When I've looked at other pension funds, although we're the second smallest in the country, the amount of work involved is virtually the same, whether you've got just over £500 million or probably 5 or 10 billion, because the noughts just go on the line of investment. It doesn't actually reflect on the work involved. The work involved is statutorily the same for everybody. And when I've looked at other smallish pension funds, they will have anything between 3 and 4 staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we all want to get the right sort of support and cover for Joe, and that's critical to do that. It's not the only area in the council, though, where we've got shortages and can't replace staff. There's a number of professions where we just can't recruit. And I wonder, is it a case of, is it that there aren't professionals out there to do all these jobs, and this is obviously a very specific one, or are we somehow not paying the going rate for the jobs, given that people can work remotely now in a number of areas and can get higher salaries in other authorities?
Sir Brady.
Thank you. It's great to hear that, in theory, we're going to be 2.2, and it's great that, my question is 2.2 enough? When we advertised originally, we obviously didn't get a suitable applicant. Is that because we didn't have the skills set available, or because we weren't paying enough money to attract the right person that we needed? Because if we're going to attract someone, we need to attract the right quality of person. Otherwise, it's false economy. So just a few quick questions, really.
Sure.
While I'm not really in a position to make any significant comment, all I can say at the moment is that while the pension fund is part of the council and part of the council structure, the pension fund is bound by the council's grading profile for its staff and its responsibilities and its role profiles. And if a role that we are seeking doesn't fit dramatically into one of those profiles, we are being forced to put it into one of those profiles for evaluation and grading purposes. So, for example, when I tried to recruit the governance person, because I was recruiting it into finance at a grade that in finance requires an accountancy qualification, I was required by HR and by senior management in finance to include an accountancy qualification in the job specification. The governance role does not require an accountancy qualification. It doesn't require, it's not a finance role. It is a governance role. It requires a legal qualification, if anything. But because of the specific nature, it's very difficult to fit pension fund roles into the council structure. I think that's a problem that is across the whole of the LGPS. And I think the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association, PLSA, did a very good report on human resources and staffing issues that basically says, while pension funds are bound by council terms and conditions, it is going to be very difficult to recruit the right people with the right skills at the right salary. So part of the issue that we've got, and kind of coming back again to Councillor Brading's point on, is 2.2 enough? This is why we're commissioning this review, to look at what the optimal structure for our fund should be. And we're asking for it to be done as an independent review so that it is not seen as coming from here, if you see what I mean, but it is a broader national experience. And then once we've determined what the structure should be, and we've got agreement from the council's corporate management team that that structure can be set up because it is a council decision, even though it's funded by the pension fund, it's a council structure because we are employed by the council, then we will need to go through the recruitment hoops. And I think phase 2 of the structure review will be looking at the job descriptions, the recruitment, and the salary structures that we have in place. So it's not going to be a quick fix. It's not an easy fix, but it is something that I obviously am very conscious of. And I think the whole team are very conscious of, and with the same issues are applying in the administration team, because the administration team here is in the business centre. It's bound by the business centre's job descriptions and grading structures. If you look at other pension funds in across the country, to an extent, some of their administration staff who are at our stage paid here are being paid almost the equivalent of, what our managers are being paid on, if not more. And so then there's that knock-on effect. So we are in a virtual environment as well. We're struggling with this as well because we are very much at risk of losing our admin team. So yeah, Matt.
Yeah, it's not just the key personnel, it's also, I've got some very talented young guys and girls that work for us within the admin team. And I'm struggling to try and keep hold of them because the salary for what they actually do and what they understand and the knowledge they need to do the job, we're not paying enough money for. And we get job things come through from the LGA, the job offers come through and they're, you know, we're talking 10, 15,000 pounds a year more for the same job they're doing. And what for me is the complexity of the scheme is so complex that my guys need to know it inside out. And it's different within the council. It's not just a transactional thing, it's a complete understanding.
Thank you, Matt. It does seem to be a systemic problem within the organisation. We've had the same coming back from some of the other business analysis we've been doing, you know, some of the pseudo trading entities, where we have this impasse of rigidity in the structure that forces measures to take place which are unnecessary and causes some confusion within achieving what we want to achieve. I think it's maybe something we can take away and think about if the transformational change, looking at organisation and structure and governance, might be able to take a broader view in the council on this one. Again, not a quick fix. I appreciate the challenges you face, Matt. Sorry, we've got some questions at the back as well.
Unfortunately, employing more staff is going to cost more and obviously going to impact on the returns and the cost structure of the portfolio. And unfortunately, I have to say, and people are not going to like this, you're going to have a much more open recruitment policy on the council. I found that, quite honestly, going into jobs in the council, it's very much a closed shop in whatever field one goes into. And as the other chap said over there, you will need to pay a market rate for somebody that's a qualified economist or lawyer. Neil Kane. And also I've run a 12 billion fund in London, so I actually know about investments.
Sorry, Neil is the scheme member, is a scheme member rep on the local pension board. He's also works in investments in London. He's an investment advisor on pension funds in London.
Yes, sorry about that. My mic only goes on when the light only comes on when the mic is on. So I share Councillor Garrett's concern. The previous board obviously, you know, was concerned about the resource issue. One option, we're a small authority, we're a small fund. I'd like an open mind in considering sharing certain key positions with other authorities. We share a 151 officer, we share a finance director. There might be, I mean, looking at the structure, looking at the various jobs that need to be done, there might be something like a responsible investment officer, which we could share with another local authority. Certain segments of the work could be farmed out. And I personally think having somebody directly employed or engaged is better than I mean, I don't like the idea of putting everything out to consultants. Having someone in-house focused on a specific task that you're sharing with another fund could be a way of doing it. And I think looking at the structure and breaking down the job to see what could be hived off. And you say that it will add expense. I mean, taking, for example, the responsible investment officer, funds such as Brunel, they've been on board because with the Environment Agency, they've been on board with that for years. Now we have very little investment in that area, and over the last, particularly over the last 2 years, the prices have gone up. So we are paying a premium getting into that. If we had been into it 2 years ago, we could have saved an awful lot of money. So to a certain extent, saying that getting more people is false, it could be a false economy if you're thinking just on the amount of money that the resources cost, because the fund is losing out on investment.
So I think we'll take all these comments on board. It's clearly a systemic issue that I think has come up in a number of places in the council. We have it here. You have your own issue specifically within pensions, looking at appropriate levels going on, and we will take it away and consider how to address this within the transformational change on a wider basis within the council. Anything else on part 4 on the agenda then today? No, are we happy to note that then as we've got? I do think it's a very important question, which is why I allowed the debate to go on a little bit, for resilience and succession planning. And if anything untoward would happen, God forbid, clearly we would be in a difficult position. And planning in advance is always a lot better than dealing with the situation afterwards. Right. So on to point 5 of the agenda then, which is the legislation and regulation update. Joe.
Thank you. I think this is probably going to sound a little bit like a repeat of what I said last time, in that the big consultation from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, henceforth called the department because I can't remember, is likely to be delayed further due to changes in government and not having ministers and a prime minister, etc. The latest thought is that there's potential for a split consultation now. So rather than having the big consultation that covers everything, the climate change related and the task force for climate related financial disclosures element is likely to be issued ahead of the rest of the main consultation, including pooling, levelling up, boycotts, governance, etc. So we're anticipating the climate change bit coming out in autumn. But again, autumn in central government world is up to Christmas Eve. So happy Christmas, Isle of Wight Council Pension Fund. The climate change element is quite critical because it's anticipated that the requirements for reporting will start from the 1st of April 23, which is not very long away really. And given the fact that we don't know what the regulations are, and we don't necessarily know what we're going to be asked to be reporting on, and we don't know whether we can collect the data that we're going to be asked to be reporting on in 8 months' time, is a little bit of a challenge. So we're keeping an eagle eye on that, and we're working with the access pool, and we're working with other colleagues across the LGPS to try and work through how we deal with that when that happens. In terms of the levelling up agenda, members will remember that there is an expectation that pension funds will have an ambition for 5% of their assets to be invested in local investments. Local has been confirmed as UK, but there is also a confirmation that it is an ambition for 5%. The 5% can include existing assets, if we had any, which we don't, so unfortunately for us. And the only compulsory action is going to be publishing a plan to invest up to 5% in levelling up investments. And we're working with colleagues in the access pool to look at a pool-wide levelling up investment in the pool area rather than necessarily in the UK, because that will help us to avoid conflicts of interest between local authority and pension fund interests in investments. In terms of other consultations and activities in government world, the department has delayed its response to the consultation on the McLeod remedy, which is the age discrimination issue. That consultation was expected before the summer recess, but is now expected to be delayed until the autumn. Read autumn as you did before. This is quite frustrating, as the changes to implement the remedy must be enforced by October 23. So that seems slightly longer away than April 23, But there is an awful lot of work that needs to be done. All of our data needs to be reviewed. All of our data needs to be updated. We need to collect information from employers. We need to monitor the members that are involved. Matthew and his team have got a big project underway, and we're very advanced, we're well advanced, in a very good position for our McLeod remedy. But we don't know what we need to do with what we've got until we get the consultation out. So we're kind of treading water at the moment, seeking information that we think we're going to need in advance of actually being told what it is we need and what we need to do with it. As well as the McLeod remedy, there is the pensions dashboard programme, which members may be aware is the national scheme to allow everybody to see all of their pensions on one place, in one central location. And the LGPS staging date for that is April 24. So at the moment. So we've scheduled a workshop for committee and board members on the 9th of November, which is facilitated by the administration software provider, to set out what the project is, what we need to do, and where we are in terms of that to get us ready for that. It's a big issue that will impact members' communication and quality of data. So it's another added burden on the administration team and an additional resource that's going to be required. So all of these elements will be factored into the resource structure consultation, to ensure that not only are we looking fit for purpose today, but we're looking fit for purpose for the foreseeable future on the information that we know, and also obviously preparing for some of the stuff that we probably don't know is out there that's going to come and hit us shortly. I'm happy to take any questions, but at the moment there's not really much I can say.
Have we given thought to timetabling whatever IT provisioning would be from when that does come out in November or whenever, so that we can have it available, Matt?
Yeah, it's more about the use of Hayward's, their facility. So they're undertaking some of the stuff for us. So we're working with them to get the data. I think we're in a really strong position. Talking to some of my counterparts last week at one of the conferences, we are in a really strong position at the moment. We've got 90% of our data in. We've matched 87% of that 90%, and we've got nearly 80% to go, ready to go to look at. So it's in 3 phases. The first phase is collating that data. The second phase is actually putting that data into the system and looking at what comes out of that, and then resourcing and resolving those issues. And then it's the remedy after that. So it's still a long process to go. And what I will say is that my team have already done additional hours of 200 hours to get to where we are at the moment. We reckon we've got another 150 hours to go before we're actually ready to upload that data. That's just the first phase. We've got phase 2 and 3. 2 is probably going to be even longer, because we're going to have to look at unpicking some of the records and manually putting them back together. So it's a laborious, long task, but we're in a really strong position at the moment. So
again, it's a common thing, it seems to be in the organisation, that a lot of the detail of the government edicts that are coming out are heavily delayed. We've had the same with the conditions on the grant payments, which has been delayed, and the detail comes out often after some of the grants have been actually submitted and paid out, the verification processes. It's good to hear that we're in such a good, strong position, and that we're doing everything we can to prepare for that. We cannot force government to do things earlier, even though we're the Isle of Wight and an enormously powerful enterprise within government. Our weight is probably somewhat limited in that debate. But it does mean that these delays cause potentially a crunch time between the autumn, notwithstanding whenever that is, as you were saying, Joe, and the April timeframe, and also the wider council financial processes, which get very intense at that time as well. So, any questions from the floor? No. All right. We'll note your update, Joe. Thank you for that. With all those caveats and delays, and I'm sure you'll keep us posted on that. Right. Item 6 on the agenda then is knowledge and understanding update. Again, Joe, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really to just remind members that whilst there is no statutory obligation on committee members to have a minimum level of knowledge and understanding to do your job in running the £700 million pension fund for 17,000 members, it is a good idea that you do have some level of knowledge and understanding to be able to do said job. So I'm continuing to press for the completion of the pension regulator online models. If you have done it, if you could please send me your development certificate, that would be really helpful. Then I won't look quite so empty on my report that I'm presenting. For the first time, I'm seeking your engagement with the council's data protection, cyber security and information assurance training, which I understand to an extent is mandatory for all elected members, but as I understand it, very few elected members have actually done it across the council, so it's not just you guys, but you could be the leaders. If you could undertake those 3 modules, that would be really helpful. I will be sharing those with the board as well at some point to encourage them to participate in that. To remind you as well that we've got the local development sessions coming up on the 14th of September. Emma from Hymans will be delivering a training session on the investment strategy and the developments of that. On the 9th of November, the pension dashboard project facilitated by our administration software provider, Haywards. And as Martin alluded to earlier, some training on risk management, including cyber, at some point as that flows through. So please attend. Those will be virtual sessions, so if you can listen in, that'd be great. The last key point which I'd like to raise, which is a really important part, is the Hymans Robertson National Knowledge Assessment Toolkit, which is on page, starts at the narrative on page 40 in your pack, paragraph 14. Hymans run a national knowledge assessment, which is basically a short online survey for committee and board members to answer some not quite general knowledge, but general knowledge on pensions questions to assess the level of understanding and to highlight gaps within our organisation and to help us to target a development plan. We partook of it in 2020 and got some useful information through, but given the wholesale changes in committee members and board members since that date, I'd like to propose that we participate in it again this year. We haven't had the formal launch of it, but it's likely to be launched in September. The surveys will take 10 to 15 minutes to complete, and from that we get a fund level report that highlights a collective level of knowledge across committee and board, an individual level of knowledge by each member, and then comparing our levels of knowledge with other funds, comparing us against where we were before, and looking at where we take this in our next steps to help us to formulate a development plan and actually look at our work plan for the next 12, 18, 24 months. Last time the survey cost around £5,000 to participate in, and we had a pretty good eventually participation across all committee and board members. If we do that this year, the cost is likely to be similar, which will be borne by the pension fund, but I think it's a really useful tool to be undertaking, and I'd like to ask the committee formally to confirm their active participation in the assessment to ensure that we can continue to develop the activity. We will be passing this through to the board as well and getting the board to agree to sign up, and I think it's a really useful tool to help us. So whilst if you could note the rest of the items and agree that you'll send me some development records, if we could have a formal agreement that we will participate in this assessment, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joe. I must confess, I did actually go to look for the modules, but I wasn't absolutely sure I was doing the right modules. Can you confirm that the background papers at 32 and 33 are what is being asked? Yes, okay, that's great. Thank you for those links then. I will go forward in the knowledge that I am actually doing the right thing. Thank you.
And for all councillors, if you have any questions, any issues, if you're not sure that you're doing the right thing, please do just drop me a call, drop me an email, and I'll point you in the right direction. And I'm happy to help you if there are any questions. The key point with all of these is really these are not specific to the Isle of Wight Council Pension Fund. They're not really specific to the LGPS. They are public sector awareness, public sector pensions awareness, but they will drive you or prompt you to ask questions about what have we got? Have we got one of these policies? Where is it? What do we do about this? That sort of thing. So it's just an overview, and I think it's really important that you do that so that you've got a background and an understanding of the complexity of the fund as well.
I wanted to add my voice to the fact that it sounds expensive to have that survey from Hymans Robertson, but it's the value in what we get back, baselining ourselves against others as much as what we get back in terms of driving our own learning, and that's really important. I think it's really important that we voice that commitment. So that I can sound like a SWAT, I can confirm I have emailed you now my evidence of doing those 3 modules that you referenced that nobody has yet done. So yeah, can I have a gold star for that or something?
I think it is important that we take our role seriously here and that we are able to build our general level of competence over time. So I think everybody's in broad agreement with that, Joe. So thank you for that. I do have one question that was raised with me separately, actually a few days ago, is was related. I don't know whether it comes really under regulations or whether it comes under this section, but the question of competence and eligibility was raised in relation to background checking. Somebody asked me a specific question about committees that deal with finances within the council, whether the members of those committees should be checked under the DVS regulations. And I think the answer is probably yes, but I don't know if there is currently a procedural or constitutional requirement in the council for such background checking. There isn't apparently on any of the finance committees, which I find quite odd, to be frank. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. If it's helpful, if I may add, and other colleagues will also know, that this matter was actually raised at a full council meeting by Councillor Lilly, I believe, who actually put forward that all elected members should have an enhanced DBS. I put forward an amendment when that didn't look like it was receiving much enthusiasm, that most elected members will have DBSs through their other roles, and perhaps because obviously there is a cost element to the council, and perhaps those third-party DBSs could be accepted, but that was also voted down. But I think Chair makes a valid point, and I think it's perhaps something that could be revisited. But I think, personally, I feel it should be brought back to full council. I think certainly within finance, but that's a matter for members to decide the most appropriate vehicle for that. Thank you.
I suspect there are probably 2 issues. One is if you say that all councillors have to have an enhanced DBS, that would be one question. The other one would be say to sit on a group dealing with the management of finances, whether it's pensions or should you have it. So obviously it's easier if everybody has, but if it was only a requirement to be on a group dealing with finances, then you would have the choice whether to be on that group or not, knowing that if you were to be on that group, you would be required to have that background check. So any other views on that point? No.
Chairman, I think I said it before. Sorry, I said at the full council meeting, and the leader agreed with me when we first got elected many years ago. It was automatic.
Yeah.
We all had a DBS check.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Yeah, and it's somehow over the years it's died away.
You know when it stopped?
No, No
Okay,
idea.
we will look into that then.
Yeah.
Councillor Churchman.
Yes, as Ian said, we all had one. And if you think that county councillors are the corporate parents for looked after children, so to me, it should be automatic for every councillor because we are the corporate parenting board as councillors.
Councillor Ward just leaving as previously notified. Thank you, Ian. Right, so I think we've finished with item 6. We've noted and confirmed the bits that Joe required of us. On to item 7 then, which is the annual report and accounts. Joe.
Thank you. I've presented to you the full current draft of the pension fund accounts in its full glorious statutory finance with all of its very useful and informative notes. There, I do not expect members to have read this, or in fact, I don't expect anybody in the world other than Joe and myself to actually read this, maybe an auditor. So it's for information really. The pension fund accounts are published as the only way that the pension fund accounts per se are published is part of the council's accounts as the administering authority for the pension fund. There is a separate requirement that the pension fund regulatory requirement that the pension fund publishes an annual report and accounts, which includes those accounts. The draft is as it is. There are some yellow highlights if you're in the online version. There are yellow highlights for missing information, which have subsequently been slightly updated in the draft version that's now been published or due for publication with the council's accounts shortly. The appendix to this report sets out the timetable for the completion of the accounts and audit, which links into the external audit planning report, which if I can take those two together. The planning report starting on page 87 is the same report that was presented to Audit Committee on the 25th of July. So I apologise to those of you that are on both, you've seen it twice. I will just raise the points that Helen Thompson, the partner from EY, raised at the Audit Committee meeting to draw members' attention. The key risks that the auditors have identified, which is on page 91 of the pack, there are no changes of risk in focus this year. Auditors always check the risk of manipulation in terms of journal processing for income. There's no suspicion. It's just a test of controls, but it's one of the areas that they do need to look at. And the valuation of private debt assets is a risk because it's not readily available on a third-party liquid market. So there's a lot of judgment involved in that one. The auditors have confirmed that materiality on page 92, sorry, which is the level on which they identify errors as critical or reportable or amendable, will be updated once the draft accounts have been sent to the auditors. And the audit has been delayed on page 109. The timeline, the pension funds audit will not start until December and will not be completed until in line with the council's audit in time for reporting at the March 2023 Audit Committee, all other things being equal. The explanation given is that similar to the audit profession as a whole, Ernst & Young are struggling to recruit and retain staff. So they've taken the decision to phase the start of their public sector audits rather than start all of them and fail all of them. They're just going to prioritise some others, and we are one of the ones that has been less prioritised. I think, as I mentioned at the previous committee meeting, the statutory deadline for the publication of the pension fund's annual report and accounts is the 1st of December. We will not comply with that this year as our audit is not starting until the middle of December. So we have reported ourselves to the LGA. We've recorded that on our breaches of the law log, and we've determined it's not significantly material to report to the pensions regulator, but we are and will be in breach of the law. The audit fees on page 115 of the pack, the scale fee increase for the previous year's audit 2021 has been approved by the Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, and the proposed fee increase for 21-22 has yet to be finalised. We're accruing fees for the current year's audit 21-22 on the basis of the agreed fees for 2021 to be complete. So whilst it's frustrating, we are in a good position. We've completed our accounts as best we can. We are now waiting for audit to start. There's a little bit of information that we're waiting for. And we're subject to audit, but we'll keep you updated as things progress. Happy to take any questions or comments on the accounts as they stand.
It did actually come up at the audit committee as well. We were fortunate enough to have both internal and external audits present at that meeting, and their capacity, together with other clarification still awaited from government on regulatory changes that they need to encompass within that, were brought up. They also brought up that there's been new issues raised very recently, which caused some concern about approving accounts that were really at the point of being approved, and things are being delayed even further at the moment. It does cause a wider issue. The wider issue is that we will be basically producing a budget and hopefully approving a budget and based on our previous accounting of our current financial situation, when those figures have not actually been audited and verified. Because the same is true that we will be coming forward in February with a council-wide budget, having no previous agreed accounts, which is something of an unknown, I gather. It also means that we have to be very mindful of these self-reporting dates to make sure that we do report all of these breaches up front, even though we don't think they're material. Clearly they are a breach, and they have in the wider council, they do have a ramification that there are other regulatory compliances that we have to do with loans and things where you need audited accounts to be able to do them, which we will not be in possession of. So I think it's quite a significant issue, albeit we don't have any reasonable way of redress to it. So, questions, people? Councillor Andre, and then
Thank you, Joe, for pulling out those sort of salient points. That was very, very helpful. It's only a very minor point, but for example, well, I was just thanking Joe, but I'm getting to that. Page 115. It might be a sort of statutory way of setting things out, because we've got planned fees, scale fees and final fees, but I noticed that it reads the opposite way round to what I would expect. Is there a reason for that? Because my eye naturally works the other way.
Presentational issues from the external auditors, Councillor Andre. No reason.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. You would expect the most recent to be on the rightmost as a timeline progression from left to right. Unless we were Chinese, of course, we might do it the other way around. All right. Any other questions on these? Councillor Churchman.
Comment, really. It's lovely to see something in the world has gone up in the terms of our fund has actually increased. If you think of everything else, when inflation, obviously. One interesting comment made to me recently at a conference, I queried why the dollar was so high against the pound. And the comment was that, in fact, the Americans don't particularly trust our Bank of England. So I don't know if Emma has heard that, but I said that was I think that was Schroeder's fund manager said that to me. Lack of trust in the Bank of England's decision making is keeping the dollar very strong against the pound. And I mean, it's about 120 at the moment. So as I said, just a comment to pass on. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Obviously, from the internal staff point of view, it's quite frustrating when you have very tight deadlines to meet to produce the stuff, and that doesn't happen from the external point of view. And I can see the frustration that we're not going to know the absolute final result until almost a year after the accounts have been, finalised from our perspective. Well, sort of a question really, we're all in this same boat, a very frustrating situation. Are there any plans to improve it? Because if they're not starting on the current accounts until 9 months later, are we going to be in the same position year on year, or have they actually got a plan to try and rein it back a bit?
I've got as well.
That was a question I asked of our external auditors when they initially told us of the first delay, and they have confirmed that they can't start planning the next year's audit until the current year's audit is completed. So given the fact that the 22 year-end audit will not complete until March 23, they cannot start planning the March 23 audit until April 23. So that's the planning stage. So normally they'd be doing that in sort of October, November, December. So we're in a increasing cycle. I personally have no idea how we're going to recover from this, but that's not my problem. It's the external auditor's problem, but it is an issue.
Yeah, the external auditors at the audit committee did note that they were now holding final certificates pending some other regulatory confirmations they were waiting for, I think in September and October, because they don't know whether those will actually cause them to reflect on any of the issues that are in that certification process. The worry is not that we cannot start something, although it is a worry, that the key thing is not that we don't start something for 9 months after accounts were finalised, it's that we run into a year-on-year rolling basis where we are completing accounts for 1 year without the previous year being completed or audited, and perhaps the year before that not being certificated. And that becomes a compounding issue to deal with. I cannot think there is much we can do about the situation where government changes are still pending, which is holding up a certificate, or that we can do about regulatory changes, which the auditors are waiting to come through to give them guidance on changes to the way that accounts have to be audited and managed. They're quite challenging issues that they seem to be faced with externally, as well as the resourcing one. I suspect the resourcing one is probably the easier of those to deal with, actually. Trevor.
Is this affecting all authorities, or is the Isle of Wight particularly badly affected compared to others?
No, all authorities. It's a national issue, and I think the reason the timeline has slipped again is because of the current hiatus going on within government, which has not helped the situation at all. There's always the question of even the dates we've been given and the auditors have been given are subject to many assumptions that are taking place, and if any of those assumptions don't take place, or if the new incumbents of those government positions feel differently on issues, then things could change again, none of which is under our control. So we worry about what we can worry about and do something about. Okay, anything else on this? Then we'll thank you very much for that, Joe. We'll note as per section 7 and come on to section 8 on the agenda, moving forward to page 125. Triennial valuation, Joe.
Yeah, very, very quick update
Matt?
from me. We've submitted the data. We submitted the data on the 20th of July, a little bit later than we personally intended, but our actual deadline date from the actuary was the 31st of July. We were slightly later because of a couple of employers' end of year data was late, and then we obviously had to look through that, but all the data looks really good. They've confirmed they've looked at the data as a whole, and very pleased with what we've got. So as far as I'm concerned, we've done what we need to do. So the valuation, and we've got a good timetable in front, haven't we, to work through it. So that's my update. Has anybody got any questions?
No, I think we'll thank you then, Matt. I think the active process we've got underway and the preparation has paid off yet again. So I think we're in a very fortunate position.
We are very much so, and I have to thank the team because they've been working tireless, not only on the McLeod stuff, but on the valuation and you're doing business as usual. So yeah.
I have listened into a few of the online briefings that we get sent to, from various people doing these forecasts and updates on behalf of local government. And it seems that just from some of the chat in some of the team sessions on those, we seem to be in a quite extraordinarily positive position compared with almost everyone else. And I don't want to knock anybody, but it's a very good place for us to be. Any questions? No? Good. Then we'll note that. Thank you very much on section 8. Moving on to section 9, which is over to Emma.
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, Emma.
Great. Okie dokie. So you've got 2 items in under section 9. One is the asset valuation of the fund, and the other one is the flash stats, which is our quarterly market update, so you can see what's been going on in markets over that period. And you'll see that markets have been extremely volatile over that period, with a nice sea of red over the last 3 months across all the major asset classes that are recorded there. So across equities and across bonds, both corporate and government. So this has been in response to a number of factors. We've seen consistently high levels of inflation, albeit it's pared back ever so slightly this quarter than it did last quarter. And a real switch from what we had quantitative easing for the last number of years to quantitative tightening from central banks. On top of a tough quarter 1, quarter 2 was also pretty tough with those assets falling. A lot of the issues are caused by inflation, driven by supply chain disruption, energy prices rising through restrictions on Russian gas, general global supply chain issues that have been exacerbated by Chinese COVID restrictions in manufacturing. And even despite stripping out things like energy and food prices, which are notoriously volatile for inflation, core inflation within the UK still remains high. So consumers are still spending money despite everything that's going on with the cost of living crisis. Core inflation is still about 5%, with headline inflation about 9%. You'll see that central banks across the global economies are really trying to get ahead of inflation and are determined to try and curb it with interest rate rises. So the Bank of England and also the US Federal Bank have increased interest rates, as have the Eurozone. The Eurozone might actually go into positive interest rates for the first time in a long time, but we'll see marked shifts in interest rates in the UK with rises bigger than anticipated. That has sometimes a limited effect on inflation that's being driven by costs and supply chain, whether raising interest rates is going to curb inflation to the extent that the Bank of England is hoping that it will, is probably still up for a bit of debate. I think inflation will be quite persistent over the short term at least. And what that means for rising inflation and interest rates is that the yield on your government bonds and corporate bonds has increased, and therefore the prices have fallen. Now this is actually quite good for a pension scheme like yourself, so aren't hedged to things like interest rates and inflation. It means that even though the prices of government bonds are falling, the yield you're getting on them is increasing because that interest rate that the Bank of England has set has increased. So you're getting kind of more interest paid on those assets, and that yield is what's linked to the discount rate for your liability. So if you're dividing by a bigger denominator, the value of your liabilities is actually shrinking. And we'll see that when we just talk about the funding level in a second. So it doesn't look pretty from an assets perspective because you'll see these declines, and you'll see them across equity markets as well. And that's because in periods of high inflation that's driven by costs and supply chain issues, so it's a cost push inflation coupled with higher interest rates, there's lots of nervousness in the markets, particularly for risky assets like equities, and that's why they've been selling off so considerably. And that's a global thing, not just a UK thing. The UK has actually marginally outperformed the rest of the UK, and that's because of the high allocation to the oil and gas sector and the huge surge in energy prices, which we've seen actually benefiting UK equities. And that's quite an unusual picture from the last few years, with the UK outperforming the rest of the globe, albeit not particularly helpful for the source of it being high energy prices for everybody that lives in the UK. So the value of sterling has fallen as well, and I know that Vanessa touched on that earlier. There's lots of things that play into what drives the value of a currency, but having the US increase their interest rates at a faster rate than the UK means that the US looks more attractive to place your money in, because they're offering a higher interest rate, and therefore sometimes you can see less money coming into the UK as a simplified example as to why we would see sterling weaken, and then also a perhaps poorer outlook for the UK economy relative to some of the other areas of the globe. So consumer confidence has really fallen. Recession is looming within the UK. Lots of economic forecasts are anticipating a recession towards later this year, start of next year, and that's why a lot of the equity assets you'll have seen have fallen away over Q1 and Q2 this year. Now, if you look at the valuation for the fund, you'll see from last quarter to this quarter, we have had a significant fall in the value of the assets. But what you will see is that you're diversifying income assets. So your property and your newly funded infrastructure and private debt assets have actually been broadly positive. So this is just a general reminder of all the work that you've done over the last couple of years to diversify away your investment strategy, making sure that your only source of growth isn't just in equities, but you've got some other asset classes there that do hold up in periods of uncertainty or high volatility. So the amount that you're suffering from equity losses just now is nowhere near as much as it would be a few years ago prior to all the work that you've done on your investment strategy, and things like infrastructure and property have held up well in that period. So your assets have fallen from 723 million last quarter to 674, although that has been coupled with a significant fall in your liabilities as well, just reflecting those gilt yields increasing. So your liabilities have actually fallen in a greater proportion than to your assets, because you have those diversifiers in there as well. So your funding level of the scheme has actually improved. And this is a nice reminder that the objective of your investment strategy isn't to consistently outperform on an absolute basis month on month. It's to outperform the value of your liabilities as a pension scheme, to make sure that you always have enough money there to pay your member benefits. And so your funding level is actually sitting at about 110, 115%, just because of that significant fall in the value of your liabilities as well. So you are still, despite negative absolute returns, you're still outpacing the value of your liability. So actually a broadly positive story from a pension funding perspective, but just something that's been super volatile over the last couple of quarters, and we'll keep an eye on as it progresses. But
we just
it does.
We just pause there, Emma, because it's quite a lot of information so far we've got, and just give people a chance to reflect on the first part of this, which is the valuation of it, and the relative, the relative performance of the pension fund overall in terms of its match against liabilities. Clearly, there's been, you talked about that perfect storm. I think it was 6 different things I counted in my mind, all working against us at the same time. Not that we're unique in that in any way. And I appreciate what you say, that our changes have helped to stem some of the immediacy of that. But there is one that I would point out, and I'll give others a chance to ask questions first, I think, before you answer it, is the performance of the Majdi fund within that portfolio in particular, which we've noted as a committee with some concerns in the past. But I'll just throw the floor open and see if anybody has any questions so far on this. No? So Emma, do you want to comment on that Majdi element first, which has clearly been an outlier in the overall table that we've got in terms of performance?
Yeah, so Majdi manage your active UK equity mandate. Now, I spoke to Jo earlier on this morning, and I think she got some preliminary figures from one of the other funds, and it does look like Majdi for Q2 have underperformed their benchmark yet again. And we've seen some consistent underperformance from Majdi as an active manager, albeit there's underperformance in general from the UK equity market. So we would expect declines, but they are posting returns that are less than what the market is returning. Now, over an economic cycle from an active manager, you would expect periods of underperformance depending on the style of that mandate, but persistent underperformance through various elements of a market cycle is what would be concerning from an active manager, and we'll touch upon that later when we talk about options for active UK equity investing. But they do seem to have quite persistent underperformance relative to both the benchmark and also their performance target. So they are actually targeted to return 2% ahead of the market, but I don't think they've actually managed to achieve the market. So you'd have been better off, in theory, investing passively without paying the active manager fees as it stands, albeit you do get significant periods of over and underperformance from an active manager, and we shouldn't be looking too short term at their performance, but it does seem to be persistent and quite long term.
So consistent underperformance, noted previously the concerns before, a significant underperformance in Q2, and they have a substantially higher fee base. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a number of elements from Agility, and I think we'll talk about them in the closed session later on in our thoughts about the fund. But there are a few things that aren't just performance related, because I would caution against just switching out in and out of managers based on relative short-term performance. You want to look at structural things like the team and the style and turnover and ownership of the firm that we can all talk about maybe perhaps a wee bit later on Majedi.
Yeah, so I was just checking the facts at this stage, that was all. Sorry, Emma, if you want to carry on.
Nope. So in short, volatile for the last quarter, and I would expect it to continue to be so. Inflation is high, although it's paring back ever so slightly. It's not increasing at quite the same rapid rate as we saw at the start of the year. Supply chain issues, energy prices seem causing a lot of problems within markets, but overall from a funding level perspective, the scheme actually are still in quite a healthy position, albeit you're going through your valuation just now, so I wouldn't put too much onus on your current funding level because it's all going through a kind of rigorous overhaul as part of the valuation. But don't be too disheartened by the negative returns you're seeing across the board. It is a global issue, but coupled by a reduction in your liabilities as well.
All right, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can I ask just one question? I don't think we've got a paper as such on how the liabilities have been valued, and you often say that you use something to do with interest rates as a kind of proxy to get to the valuation of what the current liabilities are. But aren't the real factors in terms of what our liabilities as a pension fund are, is the longevity, how long people live, and what the inflation is going to be in terms of what their pensions will increase. I just sort of struggle with that, those kind of being the real things as opposed to using a proxy for valuing the liabilities we've got.
Yeah, so you've got two elements in terms of what drives your value of your liabilities. It's just a mark-to-market movement when we're talking about the value and discount rates impacting on that. It's because your liabilities are projected so far into the future, you're kind of assuming that there's expected return underlying on your assets, and that's what we use as gilt yields. We use the gilt curve and discount them all back from that element. But you're absolutely right. So inflation and longevity will impact the absolute amounts that are paid to pensioners, and are things that we can't forget when we are looking at the value of the liabilities. But month to month, the biggest swings come from how they're valued rather than the absolute amounts that are paid to pensioners. That tends to be much slower over time, and you will just see gradual increases or decreases depending on how longevity changes and also how inflation changes as well.
Sure.
I was just going to say, coming back on what Steve was saying, we do formally value the liabilities using the assumptions that we agreed at the last committee meeting on a triennial basis. And then each quarter we get an interim funding level, sorry, wrong glasses again, an interim funding level update, which is updated using proxies for inflation, etc., etc. So we don't do a full valuation every 3 months. We do a full valuation every 3 years, and then in the interim period, we update using the proxies as Emma's identified. So the 31st of March 22 valuation, which is currently in place, the results of that should be out. Whole funds we're expecting in November-ish, all other things being equal, and that will give us the formal updated valuation, which is why it's quite difficult at the moment to say what the interim level is, because we don't want to be confusing a roll forward of the previous valuations assumptions with the creation of the new assumptions going forward. So does that help, Steve?
All right. Any other questions for Emma? No? All right. Thank you very much, Emma. We'll move on to We'll note that and we'll move on to item 10. We have a number of items circulated for your attention. 5-minute break. All right, we'll call a break.
Nothing.
So we'll pick that one. And then we come to the exclusion of the press and the public, I think, at this stage. Normally there's a little bit of paper that I read out. Not here. Is it?
I deleted this copy.
Oh, you deleted it? Oh,
Because I didn't have enough space.
that's all right. Oh, well, I'll read it out anyway. Here we go, longhand. To consider passing a resolution under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business, namely agenda items 14 to 17, on the grounds that there is likely to be a disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of the schedule 12A of the Act, and in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Do I have someone who will propose the motion? Councillor Andre, seconded by Councillor Churchman. All in favour? So passed. Thank you very much indeed. We will terminate the public element of the meeting. Okay, so you tell me when we're good to go.